Hi, thank you for teaching our Hevruta this week. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Teruma. It is pages 48 through 52 in the Our Hevruta booklet. And this week's Torah portion focuses mainly on the creation of the tabernacle, which is the portable sanctuary that the Israelites took with them as they traversed those 40 years across the desert. Now, it's really interesting to think about what is the meaning of a portable sanctuary and how do we carry holiness with us wherever we go? Is there something powerful about that which is portable as opposed to that which has an unmovable foundation? So in this week's Torah portion, there's a particular verse that the rabbis like to focus on, which is where God says, "Let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." Now you would expect the verse to say, "Let them build me a sanctuary, let them build me a house that I may dwell in it." But instead of saying in it, God says among them. In other words, it seems that God doesn't need a house to live in. It doesn't need us to build God a house to live in. Rather, we have the need to do something active, to contribute, to make beautiful, to create holy space, to come together, to plan, to build community. All of this is really for us. And when we do those things that are symbolized by contributing to a sanctuary, to a holy space, to an ingathering of community, then God doesn't dwell in those walls, but actually dwells inside of us. We've actually, by building a house for God, we've actually opened up chambers inside of our own hearts, and God dwells inside of us. Or we become aware of God's dwelling inside of us because God does dwell inside of us regardless. Now, the week's Torah portion is called Teruma. The word Teruma refers to a wave offering. It's an offering that is lifted up to God. So that act of uplifting, to me, if I was to say what the essence of Judaism is, I would say that Judaism is about lifting up the mundane to a level that is sacred. Everything we do is about lifting it up. When we say a blessing over bread, it's no longer just chowing down on bread. When we say a blessing over the wine, over the kiddush, when we say kiddush, it's no longer just a glass of wine or grape juice. It's actually bringing in a sacred time. So everything is about lifting things up. When we give tzedakah, we make holy our currency and the gift of our time. So what are the things that we lift up? How do you lift up your eating? The kosher laws make us pause and think about what we eat, but maybe the kids that you're talking with have different ways that they elevate their eating. Do they ever say a blessing? Do they think about where they buy their food? Do they think about the health of their body? How do they lift up this very animal activity, this appetite that we have, this mundane thing that we do to eat, to live, and turn it into something that is not just animal, but is humane, is spiritual? How do we lift up our shopping? Do we think about who makes our clothes? How do we lift up our homework? Some people actually dedicate a book that they're reading to somebody that they loved who might not walk this earth anymore, but continues to inspire us. It also says in our portion, "You shall overlay the ark with pure gold inside and outside." So it shouldn't just be gold on the outside, it should be also gold on the inside. And the rabbis use that to talk about how sometimes to be a mensch, to be a tzaddik, a saint, you need to, it matters what's on the outside, but it matters also what's on the inside. It says, "Any Torah scholar whose interior is not like his exterior is no Torah scholar." So if you are good on the outside, your public, things that you do, your public persona is one that is good, but you secretly inside you're not really good and you're always thinking bad things about people or secretly doing bad things, then you don't have that balance. So how do we make sure that our lives are bright and pure, not only on the outside, but on the inside, that our actions reflect our hearts? It talks in our Torah portion about the menorah and its different parts. It says that Moses had trouble building the menorah, which is funny. Why is it hard to build a menorah? And the rabbis suggest that because the menorah actually represents balance in our lives. So just like a menorah is supposed to have it's actually 3 branches on each side with one in the center. They're all supposed to be even. And burning at the same height. They're not supposed to be all different levels except for the shamash. That represents all the parts of our lives. How much time we dedicate to our family, to our work, to our homework, to our religious school, to sports, to our friends. And the truth is, it's really impossible for us to have all of our priorities burning at the same time, all of the things that matter to us. And so even Moses, Torah is saying, had a hard time building that and needed help. We also, in the Midah section, talk about this really interesting word that's used all the time in Torah called yirah, which is translated sometimes as awe and sometimes as fear. And so that's an interesting thing to talk about. First, what's the role of fear in our lives? Why is fear important? Fear is actually really important for our survival. When do we have too much fear? When do we have too little fear? And that word, we're supposed to have yirat Adonai, which can either be fear of God or awe of God. So there are different kinds of things. You're afraid of a bear, but you're in awe of a sunrise. But sometimes they come together. So maybe what are some examples of when they come together? If you're standing on the lip of the Grand Canyon, you are trembling because it's so deep, but you're also in awe because it's so grand. So how do we find those moments where fear and awe come together, and in what way do we experience God in those times? There are a couple of verses on page 50, and it's interesting to think how the verse changes depending on the translation. So if we read it, the beginning of wisdom, which is in Psalms, the beginning of wisdom is awe of God. So before you can learn anything, you have to first have awe, have a reverence for how the wondrousness of the world. That's the beginning of curiosity and wisdom. But you could also translate it as the beginning of wisdom is fear of God. And so how does that change the meaning? Or it is good to look at the sky often as it helps develop an awe of God. Or it's good to look at the sky often because it helps develop a fear of God. Why is fear of God important? We don't talk about that often, but why is it important to be afraid? How would we behave if we weren't afraid? It says in the Torah, do not insult the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. So if you didn't fear God, if you didn't fear any repercussions, if you didn't feel that anyone was ever watching you or that anything you did mattered, maybe we would do awful things. Maybe we need to have a little bit of trembling because we're afraid. So fear is the deepest, oldest, most primal part of our brains. How do we put fear to good use is a good thing to ask. The last part of this section, the mitzvah, talks about hidur mitzvah, which means beautifying the commandment. So not only are we supposed to fulfill commandments, but we also are encouraged to beautify them. So not just to light candles on Hanukkah, but to have a beautiful Hanukkah. Not just to bless the grape juice on Shabbat, but to have a beautiful chalice that we drink the grape juice out of. So all the ways that we beautify. If you talk about Hanukkah, putting up decorations or decorating your sukkah, all the ways that we beautify the Passover table, all the mitzvot that we do. So there's a lot to talk about. Another thing you might talk about is, what does it mean to build a sanctuary to God? What are places that the children think of as their sanctuaries? When they're afraid, when they're sad, when they need to meditate, when they need quiet space, when they need to feel loved, what are the places, where do they go to receive that kind of sanctuary? You might also even talk about today, in today's political climate, the political meaning of the word sanctuary and who in our world is seeking refuge and what is our obligation to them. All right, a lot to think about. Thank you so much. Bye.